A very good morning to everyone, and welcome to this session of D Talks or Disruptive Literacy Talks. As we talk about meeting goals of SDG 4 and meeting the targets of SDG 4.6 when it comes to universal foundational literacy and numeracy, uh, it is absolutely crucial that the priority is on girls and females. And as we know that if our women and if our girls are leading the change in literacy, all members of the family are impacted positively, and it's very important to also now look at how, in the current context of the pandemic, what challenges have come across when it comes to the education and freedoms of girl child, and especially on their education, and how do we move forward from here is one very important question that all of us need to think about, discuss, and commit to in terms of action as well. And to speak on this topic today, where we are talking about how the importance of girls and how they will create the future of the feminist movement, but also of development of education for the whole country. We have a very special guest. She is the founder of Voice for Girls and also Soch for Social Change. She is a very dynamic social entrepreneur. Previously, has also been part of the Harvard Dastra Social Impact Leadership Program, and is here to speak on this issue at Detox. So it's an absolute honor for us to welcome Ms. Anusha Bharadwaj. Anusha, thank you so much for your time and joining us in the today's session at Detox.
Thank you for that introduction, Masood, and for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Anusha. And it's a very important discussion here today. And uh, we know that the pandemic, of course, has created a very challenging situation, especially for girls and their education as well. But before we discuss that, would you like to share a bit more about what inspired and motivated you to be a social entrepreneur and start these wonderful initiatives of Voice for Girls and Soch for Social Change? If you could start from what these initiatives are about and what was the philosophy behind it.
Thanks for that question, Masood. I've been working in the development sector space since 2002, and I also have, worked in the areas of child rights and child education, worked with girls a lot in various organizations. And I also have a degree from the Institute of Rural Management Anand. So a lot of my work, actually all of my work life has been in the development sector. And through the years, I've realized that working with girls and women and around issues of gender and child safety and protection and really preparing them to be leaders for the future really was my call to contribute some way back to the society, right? So that really is the thought behind working with girls and working with young women, because I feel that when you work with girls and young women, they take the information and they exponentially spread it and want to share and create more awareness within the community, and so they really expand the circles of solidarity. They create a sisterhood that they know that they want to support each other, and I think it leaves me inspired. So that's the reason why I continue to work in the space and do all we can to be able to provide these girls and young women an opportunity to really take their life forward as community leaders.
That's a wonderful and refreshing inspiration to start these initiatives. And if we talk about Voice for Girls and Soch for Social Change, you mentioned that the focus is on girls who are in school education and also adolescents as well, young
Yeah.
women. So, would you like to share a bit more about what are some of the interventions, or what are some of the areas in which these two initiatives work with girls?
Uh, Again, I think Boys for Girls is focused on the adolescent age group, because adolescents, as we know, in a country like India, where there's, we're still deeply entrenched in traditional values and patriarchy. So we realize that in adolescence, there's a lot of change in expectations and social and cultural expectations from the girl, as also the boy, but mostly the girl, where she's expected to drop out, expected to take up work at home, expected to get married. The child marriage rate in India is very high. We probably are still leading in this infamous, highest number of child marriages in the world. So in this scenario, it really is important that organizations or individuals work in the area of just explaining to the girl that yes, there is going to be changes in her body, but along with this, the society is expecting you to change. And well, this is the norm that you have a right to stay in school, you have a right to, only get married after the age of 18. So how do we ensure that girls who are already in the system but very likely to drop out gets information that helps her, and skills also to help her to stay in school, delay age of marriage, delay early pregnancy, and in a way she's prepared to economically contribute also back to the society. So that's really what Voice for Girls does by working with girls within the system. But we also recognize that just working with girls and saying we're empowering girls is just one part of the story, right? That's half the conversation, but the other half is really also to talk to the boys, because they also need to recognize that adolescence means there is a change that their body also undergoes, but at the same time there is also social and cultural expectations for him to be a man, and what does that mean, and how he can actually become a gender ambassador and look at gender equality as a whole. So that's very broadly what we do at Voice for Girls, Masood.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, Anusha. And it's wonderful to learn about this initiative. And I'm sure this must be a very challenging work as well. Especially like you mentioned that given the very deeply rooted gender stereotypes and patriarchal notions of what girls should do and what are their roles and what at the same time what different genders traditional roles are as well. Is in terms of engagement with children and with young adolescents, do you find challenges when it comes to also dealing with parents? Is that something which the children that young people you are working with, how do we address their how do these initiatives also address the attitudes that parents have towards what children should do? Nisha, are you able to hear me? Right. So I think we've lost Anusha. So by the time she joins us back, uh, we'd like to share again that. Uh, okay,
So
Anusha, I think is
sorry.
back.
So sorry. I
Yes.
think internet is just flaky. So sorry. Yeah, I got almost half your question to say, is there a pushback from the community when we are talking about these questions? Did I get it right,
Yes.
Masood? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So
Is that the challenge? Yes.
so yes, I think when it comes to questioning the notions of what already exists is always a task, but what we focus on is girls in school, and we have the buy-in from the school department for us to do the program. So in that sense, there is one layer of separation from the community as it is, because these girls are in a camp atmosphere for 10 days. They're in this program. It will also help her understand that these have existed, but really for her to understand what is right or wrong. We don't say this is right, this is wrong, right? Like for instance, when we say, when you get your menstrual period, they say that you're dirty, but menstrual blood is very, it's very fertile. Actually a baby can grow in it. Do you think it is dirty blood, or you're dirty because you're having a period? So we are expecting that to give information, but we're not like giving any judgment or value. We are expecting the girl to be able to say, yeah, I think I'm not impure because I have my period, right? So a lot of her work is giving information and helping the girl assess it for for herself. That's one. And second is when they go back into the community, girls also realize that we give them life skills like self awareness, and we give them life skills around negotiation. So we also tell them that when you want to convince somebody, how do you negotiate? So girls actually take back this information in a way that they want to spread the knowledge that they've gained through the camp without a conflict, right? So, in that sense, we've been lucky that we've not gotten too much of a pushback from the community in itself.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Anusha. You've also suggested like a very interesting caption to our talk where you said girls will lead us to a feminist future. What is your imagination of a feminist future? What would be the ideal feminist future in your opinion?
I think a feminist future is a future where, irrespective of your gender, you have dignity, you have rights, and you have access to opportunities and resources. And no one gender is more powerful than the other. That's my view of a feminist future, because I think we live in a world where you have to define what is what do you mean by feminism. For me, feminism really means that there is no discrimination based on gender, and no one gender is more powerful. So I'm not saying girls and women are going to be more powerful, and roles are going to reverse. No, I don't think we should see a world where one gender has more power than the other, and gender should not be the marker for any discrimination. That's the feminist future. And if we have to get there, we already know that enough indicators that girls are very far behind, whether it is health indicators, whether it's educational indicator, political participation, freedom of voice, all of that, right? Access, mobility, resources, opportunities, I can go on. So we really need to bring girls right up there to be able to participate in economic circles, participate in politics, participate in her having a say on her own future. And I think it's only then will we be able to say, what, we will embrace a feminist future. We are far away from that. I think the pandemic has also shaken the foundations of any work that we have done. We've seen that during the pandemic, child marriages have increased, abuse against children have increased, or even against women, violence against women has increased. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here. So girls will really need to be empowered to be able to take us to a feminist future.
Right, and it's a very important point which you mentioned that when we're talking about a feminist future and what are the threats which the pandemic puts in front of us, and like you mentioned that there have been a lot of challenges, especially after school closures, that
Yeah.
there is rising violence and instances of trafficking, harassment. All these have risen, and really it has put a threat on the freedoms of girls, especially. If you like to elaborate a bit more about what is your assessment of the gravity of this problem, like there are reports coming out like by Save the Children and others which are putting some numbers on it, but what is your assessment of how grave is this problem, and how long term this problem will might be in your assessment?
I think the situation is especially sort of disadvantaged where girls are concerned. Though we thought we have a much more digital reach, I think this 1 year of any organization working in rural areas, especially with children, will know that there is a huge digital gap, right? That there is not enough bandwidth, parents don't have phones, children don't have access to the phones, all of that. But it is much more exaggerated when we say the reach of a girl to a phone. See, when you're looking at an adolescent age group, already there is this view that, if girls have a cell phone, then especially during that age, she's going to get trapped into wrong things or do something wrong or fall in love and all of that. So her access to a cell phone is heavily monitored, heavily, one, she may not have, she's using the family phone or a mother's phone or an older sibling's phone, and then there is a lot of vigilance around who's calling you, why do you have to go, you have work at home, all of that, right? So there is a huge digital gap. And once in that age group, the girl is seen at home, the community is also starting to put pressure to say, she's come of age, what is your plan, there is this boy, you should get her married to this, she'll have a good future. At the same time, because she's not engaged in education, the parents are also starting to see there is no value in, really waiting till the schools reopen. So there's a lot of dropouts, or girls getting engaged, or girls already married in the past 1 year. So the problem is really, really great. However, I think we are in a situation where, while there is evidence, while there are organizations saying, the problem is there, we really need to tackle it. We also have the government who's saying that, there is no evidence of increase in child marriage that has happened. Recently we saw news. So really, this sort of like pitching one sort of news against the other, who has evidence, is also making work for organizations like me difficult. Now, like, if I have to apply for funding and saying, what, in our experience and our ground knowledge, there is increase in child marriage, while the government has gone and announced, central government has gone and announced there is no evidence. What sort of a picture are we portraying? And I think there is a lot of inconsistencies in the way this thing is getting reported, or there is a focus in it. So that really needs to be addressed, right? Secondly, I think, if we continue to be in a situation where we are not bringing children to school, definitely there is mental health issues. Suicides amongst this age group is increasing. Children are feeling helpless. They don't see any value. They are already worried and anxious. If that is one part of the problem, the other part of the problem just is that there's 2 academic years they have lost, right? And if she's in eighth class and she has no academic sort of engagement for 2 years, you just know what is going to happen to the child, right? It's going to be even more difficult for her to catch up, even if she comes to school. So we really are in a tight spot here. And unless we think about reopening schools, and we must focus on how to reopen schools. See, the COVID has affected India as much as Telangana, as much as any other country in the world, right? But there are schools, like America has schools open, UK has schools open. Lots of countries have shown that COVID doesn't affect children in that age group, and vaccination is a way forward. We really need to ramp it up to see that our children are coming to school. Otherwise, we are going to lose an entire generation of girls who will be married off before, she is even ready physically or mentally to be able to take on those responsibilities of marriage or have a child. At the same time, I don't think the situation is any, is equally sort of worrying even for the boys, because you've seen an increased number of boys in the workforce. So what does it mean that, you have a young population, because we are going to be a country that is, going to have a very young population according to our demographics. Either they are married and sitting at home and having babies and no skills, or they are child laborers who have no skills. So what is this? What is our economy going to look like, right? So the situation is really grave. All I'm saying is we really need to ramp up all efforts possible to see that our children come back to school.
Right. I think that's a very some very important points that you made, and I think this this greater adoption of digital learning, and how our gender stereotypes affect access and acceptability of using digital devices at home. That's a very interesting and important point, which doesn't get as highlighted as much. Um, if we also talk about continuity of education, you have mentioned, for example, that the focus should be on school reopening, etc. Um, uh, After, even when schools do reopen, there a part of the challenge will still be to ensure that children do come back to school. Are there any examples from the past or in the present also, where a lot of out of school children, especially girls, have been able to be to be mainstream back into school education? Any ideas which we could use to kind of be prepared for the school reopening?
No, we have very successful models from the past, Masood, where organizations or even governments have taken up initiatives. For instance, government of Andhra and Telangana, when they were united, there used to be a big program called Badi Bata, where the teachers used to go into the communities and look at how many children are eligible to come to school, and actually in a very acceptable atmosphere, bring children to school. So there are enough models out there, and I think we just really need to see how schools can reach out to children and be able to map the children and come to school. So there are examples from the past of governments and organizations involved in ensuring increase in enrollment and ensuring that girls or children come back to school. But at the same time, I think the role of the child protection officers will be really high, and organizations working in the areas of, girls understanding abuse in the communities or working in rehabilitation and relief. We already know that incidences of abuse and violence are high, or children are dropping off to get married. So I think the role of the child protection officer becomes really important to see how we can actually stop while we work out how children come to school. So their role is quite high at this point where the schools are not open. So because the school really also becomes a point where child protection automatically happens. You know that a girl has not come to school for 10 days. You say, okay, there's something wrong, and there is a system and a mechanism in place, right? While that mechanism has been halted because of the pandemic, how do we ensure that child protection continues to happen in the community? So while we wait for the schools to open child protection, but after or while we're thinking of schools reopening, we have to look at a large scale enrollment drives.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Nunusha. And here I would like to shift our conversation now to also look at more structural issues in education policy and curriculum, and how we transact education in schools. Uh, and with respect to inclusiveness, inclusivity of different genders within our school education system in terms of curriculum, policy, daily classroom transactions. What is your assessments in terms of where what gender inequalities exist in how our education system is structured, and how would you what would your assessment be, or what would your suggestion be on how we can make it more inclusive in the coming time?
One is, I think we need to recognize that, during the adolescent age, we must focus on giving education to girls about their growing bodies, about menstrual hygiene and products that are available. So that basic level of sex education is still largely missing in the mainstream education system. That I think is really, really critical. There is a lot of shame and stigma that is associated with menstruation or anything to do with sex education, right? Like, how do you destigmatize it and give information that is so critical? Because the girl needs to have control over her body, otherwise she can face violence. She'll not have a say in family planning options, or a whole lot of issues that will happen even in terms of reproductive health or fertility and all of that, right? So how do we give her information in a safe space which is not attached with stigma and tab? Okay, that's one part of the work that needs to be done. Second is just in terms of access to a clean bathroom, access to menstrual hygiene products, whether in the school or in the community, access to bathrooms when girls. I mean, when girls have a period, I mean, it's basic that they want to use the washroom more often, and she should have some place to discard her use sanitary napkins. See, these basic facilities are still largely missing in schools. Uh, Thirdly, I think we need to see how do I put it? Really, in terms of policy, I would say curriculum in itself, right? Though there have been large advances in ensuring that when you have a nurse, you also have a male nurse and a female nurse. But still, you go into classrooms or even organizations or even, international schools, they would automatically say, like, my son is 5 years old and he goes to school online, and luckily because it's online we know what's happening, so there is some bit of interaction. And every time the teacher initially used to say, please go call your mother because we have to say something, and we notice that a lot of fathers sit with their children to class. I mean, there's an automatic notion that your mother cooks good food for you, please call your mother, we have to tell something about the child, your mother. So how do we, engage with the system to say that though I can write excellent curriculum, nowhere in the curriculum it says that the mother is the only one cooking, but the teacher is relaying information because that's her worldview, right? So how that the curriculum change doesn't just remain in the books. We really need to sensitize the interaction point between the child and the adult, right? And that's really the teacher. She's the agent there in the classroom, and she can be an agent for change instead of holding values. So how do we really focus on teachers as these agents of change? I think that's where we really need to look at, because policy changes are happening, curriculum changes are happening, Masood, but that interaction is still, you say a leader, he is a person who goes out in the community, the child is automatically learning that the leader can only be a man. But nowhere in the curriculum it says. Maybe there is a photograph of Indira Gandhi as much as it has about, say Abdul Kalam, right? So, but the teacher is the one who is giving this information. So, how do we sensitize her or him, right, while they are making this interaction in the classroom?
Right. That's a very interesting point. And when you talk about teachers as change makers, right? So they are really the fulcrum, which of whatever policy which we make on our paper. On we might have great administration structures, but the ultimate fulcrum which kind of decides that what is going to be transacted inside the class depends on the teacher. But do you think that it is also a challenge, or when it comes to teachers, because they themselves, of course, being part of the same society, and often might have been, they're coming from the same system as well, in terms of notions about gender, etc. If what would be some challenges, and if possible, if are there any success stories where teacher capacity building programs have been able to kind of bring in inclusive, make gender more inclusive into the school transactions?
The government schools have excellent actually training facilities, and regularly they do look at training teachers, unlike actually private schools where it's not a requirement. But I think it is about agencies being involved, because I think this is where civil society organizations really will help and support these programs. And yes, there are a lot of, like I said, best practices in seeing how teachers can, convey this information. But I think this is a larger, systemic problem that we have, right? I don't know how many educated, like even if you go to a corporate, they're going to say, the leader, he's a man, he's a person who is, right? Like, so I don't think just education is enough. And I think a lot of this it should be ingrained in a larger society. Media has a role to play in this, because they always have this ad where she's washing clothes and the work clothes is white. I mean, there's very few, departures from the traditional, whether it is movies, because that's also a big area where children are learning from, right? Like, I would say that it's not enough to just bombard this information from the school or just the home. I think all of this has to work together in doing it. I think we need policy changes in media. And I mean, even now, if we glorify a movie like Kabir Singh and say, well, that should be the ideal, that's not ideal. It's toxic masculinity, and it's as worrying that a man would look at being that sort of a person, and it's worrying that the women are aspiring for a person like. I mean, there's a lot of the role that something like media or films or advertisements can play, right? So while we look at training teachers and making it more gender equal, whether it's in the classroom or in the curriculum, how do we talk to parents about it? How do we prepare corporates to be able to accept women as leaders in the community? How do they give space for women, where in terms of she's going to have a maternity leave, she's going to have children? How do you not make decisions of hiring based on the gender? So there's a lot of work to be done. So sorry, I'm not giving you a very positive answer there. There's no quick fix to this. That's one.
Right. That's completely fine, and it's kind of in line with the disruptive part of our talks. to not to kind of have answers which trigger us to really think more and not be happy with the status quo. One final question, Anusha, which we would like to ask you is about foundational literacy and numeracy. As all of us are aware that in India has, even before the pandemic, had been facing a crisis of foundational literacy and numeracy, and all data, be the achievement surveys or the ASER reports, point in that direction. What is your take on the role of foundational literacy and numeracy skills in ensuring equitable access and opportunities for children, especially girls, for all their future education and work opportunities?
I think it's a no-brainer, right? Like, I mean, all of us should have that foundational literacy, and whether it is ASA studies or everything is saying that the levels to which children should be to where they are is there's a huge gap. But again, it also means that especially in areas where the only sort of schools available are the government schools, though the government has excellent teachers, they are not really very accountable. So, how do you prepare the community to make the schools accountable? Because this is quality education that the government is promising. How do we help them stay to that promise? Because if children don't come to school, you can have an excellent teacher and it will not work. Or if there is, this excellent teacher, but he or she decides never to come to school, but the children want to come. So there is a huge gap there as well, right? So, and I think the formative years really become crucial for this. So, early childhood education in any case is really, where a lot of experts are saying we must focus on, because I think by 6, I think the child's capability to take in language or take in, information, I think it's very expanded. How do we capitalize on that time, and how do we ensure that we have that in nooks and corners, not just in the city, right? Or not just for people who can afford education. And especially this becomes a need for a girl, because that is another area where they're going to say, well, okay, anyway, you're not really good in education. At least you can, support your family. So you don't want that to happen. Then you really need to say whether she's a girl or a boy. Numeracy is important. Foundational skills are important. So yes,
Hmm.
like I said, it's a no-brainer. We must all focus on that. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Anusha, for taking us through these wonderful ideas of yours, and I think you've made some very strong and convincing points, which I think has really triggered a lot of thoughts, which should be taken forward when it comes to any organization, be it government, be it civil society organizations or corporates. That when we talk about inclusivity, then gender has to be a very important aspect, and only when we do address the problems of inequitable access to education and opportunities of girls, we can be truly become developed as a society, as a country as well. So, Ms.
True.
Anusha Bharadwaj, thank you once again for giving your valuable time here at Detox.
My pleasure.